Good afternoon. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Her Excellency Marie Chantal Wakazina, Chair Rapporteur of the Intergovernmental Working Group on the effective implementation of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, I am pleased to present to you the report of the Intergovernmental Working Group on the 21st session. The session took place from 16th to 20th October and from 20 to 24 November 2023, and counted with the participation of member states, members of civil society, UN agencies and bodies, human rights special procedures, and experts. During the session, participants discussed and shared views on the current manifestation of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance worldwide. We also spoke about measures to enhance the effectiveness of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, follow-up mechanisms, and collectively reflected on ways to ensure better synergy and complementarities in their work. Distinguished delegates, the working group acknowledged the essential contribution of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action to the effective implementation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The DDPA is by essence a document of equality and non-discrimination, fundamental principles of human rights. The Durban Declaration and Programme of Action promote respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinions, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. The DDPA is both an historic and forward-looking document that provides a roadmap for states, international organizations, civil society, and other stakeholders to effectively address racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Scanning at the global landscape, the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action is more relevant than ever. The DDPA is a document of solidarity, peaceful coexistence, respect among our one human family. It addresses a wide range of subjects, including the need for national action plans, adequate and appropriate legislation and legislative frameworks, measures in the fields of education, awareness raising, employment, health, environment, poverty eradication, and economic development. The DDPA also underlines the importance of appropriate remedies and positive action for victims of racial discrimination. With regard to people of African descent, during its last session, the working group acknowledged that the invisibility of people of African descent in policymaking processes enables structural and systemic inequalities and perpetuates disparities in socioeconomic development. The working group is of the view that collecting disaggregated information in accordance with national law on the situation of victims of racism is essential for a data-driven and evidence-based approach to address systemic racism. The working group took note that there is an increasing willingness and emerging practice of acknowledging the need to repair the continuing impact of enslavement, the transatlantic trade in enslaved persons, and colonialism. We recognize that there is momentum for a dialogue on reparatory justice that may tackle the systems and structures that perpetuate harm. During the session, the working group also recognized that the International Decade for People of African Descent has contributed to increasing awareness of the vulnerable situation of people of African descent. Nonetheless, the program of activities for the International Decade for People of African Descent has not been fully implemented in relation to justice and development. Therefore, the working group recommends that the General Assembly declare a second International Decade for People of African Descent, highlighting the full reaffirmation and implementation of the program of activities of the first decade. We suggest that the second international decade for people of African descent focus on consolidating past gains, expanding its scope of contemporary opportunities for development, inclusion and peace, and anticipating emerging risks and threats, such as the misuse of artificial intelligence, environmental degradation, and the resistance to affirmative action policies, racial equality legislation, and programs targeting people of African descent. Finally, during its 24th session, the working group continued the discussions on the draft United Nations Declaration on the respect, protection, and fulfillment of the human rights of people of African descent, as requested by the General Assembly in its resolution 76/226. Despite the promising advances made on the Chair's document, a lot of work remains to be done to have a comprehensive and forward-looking global framework which reflects human rights concerns, lived experiences, and aspirations of people of African descent themselves. A strong United Nations declaration on the respect, protection, and fulfillment of the human rights of people of African descent should address the systemic and historic racism as well as contemporary human rights violations affecting people of African descent. The declaration should be a priority for all of us. The discussion on the draft declaration and the advancements on the text will be reflected in a status report to be considered by the General Assembly this year in its 79th session. On behalf of Her Excellency, Marie-Chantal Wakazina, I would like to sincerely thank Member States, the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, the Working Group of Experts on Peoples of African Descent, and civil society organizations for your valuable contributions to the draft declaration. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, as today we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination here in this room, let's acknowledge that despite all the efforts made by the international community, governments and local authorities, the scourge of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance persist and continue to result in grave human rights violations and disadvantage. Let's recommit today to combat this suffering and violence by all available means and as a matter of the highest priority. I thank you for your kind attention.